Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are looking at a seriously complex and honestly deeply consequential geopolitical issue. We're unpacking a critical analysis by Karatalin Khalid that looks at the escalating tensions between India and Pakistan. And the battleground here? It's water. Specifically, the author analyzes India's dam construction on the Ravi and Chenab rivers, framing all this new infrastructure through the lens of strategic warfare and hydro-hegemony. It's a fascinating read, and we're going to impartially walk through the claims, the hard data, and the proposed solutions laid out in this source text. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with the high stakes on the Indus River, then look at the rules set by the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty. From there, we'll hit the main flashpoints on the Ravi and Chenab rivers, factor in climate and diplomatic delays, and finally wrap up with what the author calls a strategic awakening. Part 1, High Stakes on the Indus, the existential reliance on a single river system. To really grasp this analysis, you have to understand how the author frames water. It's not just some economic resource. It's the absolute bedrock of Pakistan's national survival. Just to set the tone, look at this quote adapted from the Strategic Security Review in 2025. It reads, "The Indus Waters Treaty has survived 3 major wars, but it was never designed to withstand a determined campaign of coercive infrastructure development by an upstream hegemon." So the author's basically arguing that India's recent upstream developments aren't just your standard modernization projects. From their perspective, it's a deliberate weaponization of water flows that's putting immense stress on a historic treaty. So the crucial point here is 90%, over 90% of Pakistan's agriculture depends entirely on the Indus River system. Think about that for a second. Because of this staggering reliance, the author points out that any flow manipulation from upstream represents a literal existential threat to the country's food security, its economy, and its social cohesion. It is, without a doubt, their ultimate vulnerability. Part 2, the Indus Waters Treaty, the rules of the river from 1960. Okay, to understand the current dispute, we really need to look at the legal framework. This table, which is derived from the text, breaks down the 1960 treaty allocations. It divides the rivers into 2 main groups. The eastern rivers, that's the Ravi, Bias, and Sutlej, are allocated to India, and they're permitted full use of those waters. The western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, are allocated to Pakistan, giving them primary rights. But here is exactly where the friction lies. The treaty does allow India some limited, non-consumptive use of Pakistan's western rivers. And that limited use specifically includes run-of-the-river hydroelectric plants. If you're not familiar, these are power facilities that generate electricity without needing a massive traditional reservoir. India is totally permitted to build these on those western rivers, but, and it's a big but, they are subject to very strict technical constraints. These rules are designed to prevent any major manipulation of the water flow. However, the author argues that India's recent projects are testing the very limits of those constraints. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a concept the source material calls salami slicing. The author accuses India of using this tactic by making minor, incremental technical changes to their dam designs. Individually, these little engineering tweaks might seem completely insignificant, or at least easy to justify. But collectively, the author argues they slice away at the treaty's limitations piece by piece, eventually granting India major strategic leverage over Pakistan's water supply. Part 3, Flashpoints on the Ravi and Chenab, Technical Disputes and Hydro-Hegemony Claims. And that brings us right to the geographical core of the author's argument. Let's zoom in on the actual infrastructure projects being built today and contrast these 2 rivers. On the left, we've got the Ravi River. This is one of the eastern rivers allocated to India. Here, the author points to the recently completed Shapar Kandi Dam and the Uj multi-purpose project. The argument is that these consolidate total control over eastern flows, effectively eliminating any natural buffers for Pakistan's Punjab province. Now on the right side, we have the Chenab River, a western river allocated to Pakistan. The author claims this is the absolute most critical front of the dispute right now, specifically pointing to the Pakal Dal, Kiru, and Ratla projects. The big worry here? De facto storage. Essentially, the creation of hidden reservoirs that violate treaty limits. Let's break down the specific engineering critiques from the text for these Chenab projects. Take the Pakal. It's a massive 1,000-megawatt project. The author alleges it has excessive pondage, which basically means it stores way too much water. Plus, it has high-level spillway release gates. For the Rattle project, the main concern is a spillway configuration that could easily allow flow manipulation. And then for Kiro, the claim is straight up that its pondage volume exceeds treaty limits. So the author's core fear across all of these is that these specific designs could allow India to act as a hydro-hegemon, meaning they'd have the power to literally hold water hostage during crucial winter sowing seasons, or on the flip side, release it all at once and cause destructive monsoon floods.
Part 4. Climate and diplomatic delays. Institutional inertia and a warming planet.
And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. The source material makes a really strong point that these engineering disputes don't just exist in a vacuum. They're heavily compounded by diplomatic inertia. Look at these timelines. The dispute over the Rattle Dam entered the Court of Arbitration back in 2016, and more than 8 years later, it is still unresolved. The Pakal and Kiru dispute, that went to a neutral expert in 2022, and yet, still unresolved years later. The author argues that this incredibly slow pace of international arbitration plays right into upstream hands. It allows these procedural delays to just drag on while the actual concrete is being poured, creating a total fait accompli by the time a verdict is actually reached. Now, combine all that institutional delay with the looming threat of climate change. The Indus Basin is warming faster than the global average. Under a high warming scenario, we're talking 4 degrees Celsius or more. Projections show a 20 to 30% reduction in river flows by 2050. That means severe water scarcity. Add in extreme weather variability causing way more frequent floods and droughts, and you've got an absolute existential multiplier. The text emphasizes that in a rapidly warming, unpredictable climate, the ability to control even a tiny fraction of river flows becomes a highly potent strategic weapon. Part 5. A Strategic Awakening. The author's proposed solutions for Pakistan. Let's move to and see how this builds into the author's final recommendations. The text argues forcefully that passive diplomacy is just no longer an option, offering a pretty bold 4-step solution for Islamabad. Step 1. Internationalize the issue. Basically, move beyond just bilateral talks and get global powers to recognize the serious security implications here. Step 2. Accelerate domestic storage. They need to fast-track indigenous dams, like the Daimar Basha, to reduce their dependence on unpredictable upstream flows. Step 3. Strengthen technical diplomacy. This means deploying top-tier engineers and legal experts to fiercely challenge any non-compliant designs. And finally, Step 4. Adopt a defensive offense posture. The author urges Pakistan to align its water security directly with hard national defense strategies, treating these water threats just as seriously as a military incursion. Which brings us to our final thought. Will the Indus Basin's future be defined by vulnerable diplomacy or strategic survival? According to the author we've explored today, this dispute on the Ravi and Chenab rivers has completely transcended basic technical arguments over irrigation or electricity. For the source, this is undeniably an issue of sovereignty and the very survival of the state. It's an incredibly complex and fascinating perspective on exactly how infrastructure, law, and geography intersect in one of the world's most critical regions. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.